The sun was bleeding out over the Montana horizon, a bruised purple stain against the encroaching night. October wind, sharp as a skinning knife, tore through the sagebrush, carrying the metallic scent of coming snow and the ancient silence of the mountains. Silas Thorne stood on the porch of the Iron Creek Ranch, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. He watched the light die, a ritual he had performed every evening for the 4 years since the fever took his parents. At 36, Silas wore his solitude like a heavy coat he couldn't take off. He was lean, carved from the same granite as the foothills, with eyes the color of burnt whiskey and hands scarred by rope, wire, and hard choices. The ranch sprawled around him, 3,000 acres of stubborn earth and high hopes. It was a legacy built on his father's grit and his mother's prayers. But prayers didn't feed cattle, and grit didn't keep a house warm. The curtains his mother had sewn were gray with dust. The garden was a graveyard of withered stalks. Silas needed a cook. He didn't need a wife. He had exercised that dream the day Lydia Cross rode out of town with Caleb Ventress, the man Silas had called brother. He just needed someone who could make a stew that didn't taste like ash and keep the coffee black and hot through the months of isolation ahead. The previous cook, a toothless drifter named Old Josiah, had packed his bindle in September, muttering about the ghost of winter before heading to Arizona. Silas couldn't fault him. Montana winters didn't just freeze the body, they gnawed at the mind. The notice he'd tacked up at Miller's Mercantile had been blunt. Cook wanted, room and board, honest wages. Iron Creek Ranch, S. Thorne. He had ridden into town that morning, expecting a hardened widow or perhaps a miner's wife down on her luck. He had not expected Elara Vance. She had been sitting in the gloom of the station lobby, a single leather trunk at her feet, holding a crumbled newspaper advertisement like a lifeline. In a room smelling of stale tobacco and unwashed bodies, she looked like a porcelain teacup in a bucket of nails. She wasn't beautiful in the loud, painted way of the dance hall girls in Helena. Her beauty was quiet, dangerous. Dark hair pulled back severely, clothes that whispered of Eastern money despite their wear, and a high collar that choked her throat. "Miss Vance?" Silas had asked, hat in hand, feeling the trail dust on his clothes like a sin. She looked up. Her eyes were green. Not the bright green of spring grass, but the deep, dark green of a pine forest before a storm. "Mr. Thorne?" Her voice was polished glass, educated, trembling. "You answered the ad." "I did." She stood, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands. "I can cook, Mr. Thorne. I can clean. I can mend anything that is broken, be it fabric or furniture." Silas narrowed his eyes. She looked like she'd never held anything heavier than an embroidery needle. "Iron Creek is 25 miles from civilization. We get snowed in by November. It ain't a place for visitors." "I am not a visitor," she said, her chin lifting. "I am looking for work, and I am looking for a place where questions regarding my past remain unasked, provided my work is satisfactory." That was the tell. Everyone west of the Mississippi was running from something. The law, a debt, or a broken heart. Silas had his own ghosts. "Can you make biscuits?" he asked. "I can make biscuits that will make you weep, Mr. Thorne." He almost smiled. "Pack your things. Wagon leaves in 10 minutes." The ride back was a study in silence. Elara sat rigid on the wagon bench, staring at the endless expanse of the plains. Silas tried to point out the landmarks, the Devil's Spine Ridge, the winding snake of the creek, but she offered only curt nods. She was shivering, her thin woolen shawl useless against the biting wind. Without a word, Silas pulled a heavy buffalo robe from behind the seat and draped it over her. She flinched, terrified, before realizing it was an act of kindness. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling the fur to her chin. When they crested the final rise, Iron Creek lay below them in the indigo twilight. The main house, the barn, the bunkhouse, it all looked small against the vastness of the world. "It's—" Elara searched for the word. "Desolate," Silas offered. "Quiet," she corrected. "It's very quiet." "That bother you?" "Mr. Thorne, quiet is the only thing I crave." As the wagon clattered into the yard, a coyote howled, a lonely, piercing shriek. Then another joined, and another. Elara gripped the buffalo robe, her knuckles white, but she didn't scream. Silas noted that. A woman who didn't spook at the coyote choir might just survive the winter. The house was a tomb of cold air. Silas lit the kerosene lamps, revealing the neglect. Dust motes danced in the yellow light. "Your room is top of the stairs, first on the right," Silas said, setting her trunk down. "Kitchen is through there. Pump works, but you have to prime it. Wood box is empty." She removed her gloves, revealing pale, slender hands. "When did you last eat a hot meal, Mr. Thorne?" "Tuesday, I reckon. Cold beans since." "Show me the pantry." She didn't rest. She didn't unpack. She rolled up her sleeves and declared war on his kitchen. Within an hour, the iron stove was roaring, radiating a heat that chased the chill from the corners. The smell of frying bacon and rising dough hit Silas like a physical blow. He sat at the rough-hewn table, watching her. She moved with a desperate economy, as if stopping would allow her thoughts to catch up with her. When she set the plate down, steak seared in butter, potatoes roasted with rosemary found in the back of the cupboard, and biscuits that steamed in the cold air, Silas took a bite and closed his eyes. "It's edible?" she asked, her voice tight. "Miss Vance," Silas said, "this is the best thing I've tasted in 3 years." She poured herself black coffee and sat opposite him. "Tell me the rules, Mr. Thorne, the routine." "Up at 4, coffee strong, breakfast for the hands by 5, supper at 6. Sundays are yours. I pay 30 a month." He paused, looking at her over the rim of his cup. "And I don't ask questions, but if trouble comes looking for you, I need to know if it's the kind that carries a badge or a gun." She went still. "It carries neither, Mr. Thorne, just memories, and a cruelty I wish to forget." "Fair enough." That night, lying in his cold bed, Silas listened to the floorboards creak above him. He felt a strange shifting in the atmosphere of the house, as if the molecules were rearranging themselves to make room for her. Outside, the wind screamed, but for the first time in years, the house felt anchored. The first month was a brutal education. Elara Vance learned that the romance of the West was a lie sold in dime novels. The West was dirt, blood, and wind that stripped the moisture from your skin. She woke to ice on the inside of her window pane. The water in the basin was a solid block. Her hands, used to piano keys and silk, cracked and bled from the harsh lye soap and the freezing well water. The ranch hands were a rough tribunal. There was Red, a grizzled veteran of the Indian Wars who spoke to his horse more than people. The O'Malley brothers, Finn and Sean, Irish giants who worked hard and drank harder, and Mateo, a young vaquero with a quick smile and a reverence for Silas. They watched her with skepticism. A city bird, they thought. She'll fly south at the first snow. But Elara didn't fly. She wrapped her bleeding hands in linen strips and kept scrubbing. She learned to bank the stove so it held coals till morning. She learned that silence was a language of its own. One evening, Silas found her weeping over a bucket of potatoes. She wasn't sobbing loudly. She was just letting tears fall into the muddy water. He stepped into the kitchen, a tin of salve in his hand. "For your hands," he said, placing it on the table. She wiped her face with her apron. "I'm fine." "You aren't. Your knuckles are split. Use the salve. It's bear grease and arnica. Smells like hell, but it works." "Why do you care?" she snapped, the fatigue breaking her composure. "Because you can't knead dough with crippled hands," he said softly, "and because nobody deserves to bleed for their supper." She looked at him then, really looked at him, seeing past the grime and the beard to the man beneath. "Thank you, Silas." It was the first time she had used his given name. Routine became their armor. Days of labor, evenings of quiet companionship. Silas began to linger in the kitchen after supper, mending tack while she prepped for the morning. Then came the music. It was a Tuesday, the wind howling like a banshee. Silas walked into the living room to find Elara standing by the dusty mantel, looking at his violin case. "Does it play?" she asked. "Hasn't in years. My mother taught me. I haven't had the heart." "Music is good for the heart, Silas, especially the broken ones." He opened the case, rosin dust floating in the air. He tuned it, the strings groaning in protest, and played a simple scale. Then, a reel. His fingers remembered what his mind had tried to forget. Elara closed her eyes and began to hum. It was a low, mourning sound at first, then it swelled. She sang in a language he didn't know, Gaelic, perhaps, or Old French. It was a lullaby, haunting and sweet. Dormez, mon enfant, le vent souffle. When the song ended, the silence in the room wasn't empty. It was heavy with shared emotion. "You have a voice like an angel, Elara," he said, his voice rough. "My mother was an opera singer in Boston," she admitted, touching her throat. "Before she died, she taught me that a song can carry you through the darkest night." From then on, the music became their ritual. While the storms battered the walls, they built a fortress of melody inside. It was an intimacy more profound than touch. But the world outside Iron Creek was not content to leave them be. Trouble arrived on a black stallion, wearing a coat that cost more than Silas's entire herd. Cyrus Vane owned the Double Bar Ranch to the north, and his appetite for land was as bottomless as his greed. Elara was in the yard feeding the chickens when Vane and 3 of his riders crested the hill. Silas emerged from the barn, a Winchester rifle cradled casually in his arm. "Morning, Silas," Vane called out, his voice oily. He was a handsome man in a predatory way, with eyes like polished flint. "Heard you got yourself a new filly." Silas didn't blink. "State your business, Cyrus, and mind your tongue." Vane chuckled, dismounting. He walked toward Elara, ignoring the rifle. "Miss Vance, is it?" Word travels. "A lady of quality, hiding out in a shack like this? Makes a man wonder." "I am the housekeeper, Mr. Vane," Elara said, her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Housekeeper." Vane looked her up and down, a gaze that felt like a physical violation. "A waste of talent. See here, Silas, my offer stands. Sell me Iron Creek. The water rights alone are worth it. I'll give you enough to move to California. Take your pretty little cook with you." "Get off my land," Silas said, the hammer of the rifle clicking back. A sound loud as a cannon shot in the quiet air. Vane's smile vanished. "Winter is coming, Silas, and accidents happen. Fences break, cattle stray, fires start. A man alone can't watch everything." "I ain't alone," Silas said. "No?" Vane looked at Elara, a cruel glint in his eye. "I did some checking, Miss Vance. Sent a wire to the east. Interesting things, telegrams. They tell you about women who run away with jewelry that doesn't belong to them." Elara's face drained of blood. "You have 10 seconds, Silas growled. Vane mounted up. "Think on it, both of you." When they were gone, Elara nearly collapsed. Silas caught her arm. "What did he mean? The jewelry?" "Lies," she whispered, shaking. "My mother's jewelry. He said I stole it, but it was mine. The man I left, he twists everything." "Who is he?" "Julian Blackwood, a powerful man in Philadelphia. He thinks he owns me." Silas looked at the horizon where Vane had disappeared. "Well, he don't own you here. You're under my protection, Elara, and I don't give up what's mine." The word mine hung in the air between them, fraught with a new, terrifying possibility. December descended with the wrath of God. The blizzard of '88, the old-timers would call it. The sky turned a bruised gray, and the temperature dropped so fast the trees cracked like gunshots. "Get the herd to the South Canyon!" Silas yelled over the roaring wind. He, Red, and the O'Malleys rode out into the whiteout. Elara stayed behind, pacing the kitchen, feeding wood into the stove until the iron glowed cherry red. Hours bled into darkness. The hands returned, one by one, frozen and exhausted. But Silas didn't come back. "He went after a stray calf," Red gasped, his beard a mask of ice. "Got separated near Dead Man's Drop. Visibility is 0, ma'am. We can't find him." "You have to go back," Elara cried. "Horses won't move," Mateo said, crossing himself. "To go out now is death." Elara looked at the window. The snow was a solid wall of white. Silas was out there, freezing, dying alone in the dark. "A song can carry you." She grabbed her heavy cloak and Silas's spare lantern. "Miss Elara, no!" Red shouted. She ignored him. She tied a rope around her waist, securing the other end to the porch railing. She stepped into the void. The cold hit her like a hammer. The wind stole her breath. She couldn't see her own hand in front of her face. She stumbled forward, the rope taut, swinging the lantern. "Silas!" she screamed. The wind swallowed the name. She knew shouting was useless. The wind was too loud. She needed something that could cut through the gale. She needed a frequency that defied the storm. She began to sing. She sang the operatic arias her mother had taught her. She projected from her diaphragm a pure, piercing sound that spiraled into the storm. She sang of spring, of fire, of defiance. Ave Maria, gratia plena. She walked in an arc, tethered by the rope, a lighthouse of sound in the white ocean. Her throat burned, her face was numb, but she sang until she tasted blood. And then a shape emerged from the whiteness, a horse, staggering, head down, and a man, slumped in the saddle, encrusted in ice. "Silas!" The horse stopped, guided by the light and the voice. Silas fell from the saddle more than dismounted. Elara caught him, the weight driving her into the snow. He was barely conscious, his skin blue. "I heard," he mumbled, his teeth chattering violently. "Angels!" Somehow, she dragged him to the porch. Red and Mateo burst out, pulling them both into the warmth. They stripped him of his frozen clothes, wrapped him in heated blankets, and poured whiskey down his throat. Elara sat by the fire, holding his frostbitten hands against her skin, weeping silently. Later, in the dead of night, the storm raging impotently outside, Silas opened his eyes. He looked at Elara, keeping vigil in the chair beside him. "You came for me," he rasped. "I wasn't going to let the winter take you," she said fiercely. "I heard you singing. I thought I was dead. I thought I was crossing over." He reached out, touching her face with a bandaged hand. "Why, Elara? Why risk your life for a broken-down rancher?" "Because," she whispered, leaning into his touch, "you are the only man who has ever seen me. Not my face, not my family's money. Me." "Elara!" "Silas." He pulled her down to him. The kiss tasted of whiskey and survival. It was desperate and tender, a seal on a bond forged in ice. That night, she didn't return to her room. They lay together under the mound of quilts, holding each other against the cold, two broken pieces fusing into something whole. Peace returned with the sun, but it was fragile. In January, the law came to Iron Creek. Sheriff Miller, a good man with a weary face, rode into the yard with a posse of 6 men. Silas met them on the porch, Elara standing just behind his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Silas," Miller said, refusing to meet his eyes. "I got a warrant." "For who?" "For Miss Vance, or should I say, Miss Elara Blackwood?" Elara gasped. "Blackwood? No, that's not my name. Warrant says you stole jewelry valued at $5,000 from Mr. Julian Blackwood, your fiancé, and that you are a fugitive from justice." "He lied!" Elara screamed, stepping forward. "He gave them to my mother. I sold them to escape him." "Take her," Miller ordered. "Over my dead body," Silas leveled his Winchester. The posse drew their revolvers. "No!" Elara grabbed the barrel of Silas's rifle, pushing it down. "Silas, don't! They'll kill you. There are too many. I won't let them take you." "You have to," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Fight for me in the court, Silas. Don't die in the dirt. Please." Silas looked at her, agony in his eyes. He slowly lowered the gun. "I will get you out. I swear it." They shackled her wrists. As they rode away, Elara looked back to see Silas standing in the snow, looking smaller than she had ever seen him. The trial was a circus. It was held in the county courthouse, the air thick with the smell of wet wool and judgment. The town of Helena had turned out in droves to see the jewel thief of the East. Julian Blackwood sat at the plaintiff's table. He was a man of terrifying polish, wearing a suit that cost more than Iron Creek. He looked at Elara with a smirk that chilled her blood. Silas had hired a lawyer, a young man named Samuel, using the last of his savings. But it looked hopeless. Julian had receipts, he had character witnesses from Philadelphia, and he had the charm of a snake. "She is unstable," Julian testified, wiping a fake tear. "Hysterical. I tried to care for her, but she stole my family heirlooms and fled to live in sin with a cowboy." The crowd murmured, scandalized. Mrs. Higgins, the town gossip, fanned herself vigorously. Elara sat in the dock, her head high, but inside she was crumbling. Who would believe her? "I call Mrs. Beatrice Sterling to the stand," Silas's voice boomed from the back of the room. The doors swung open. A small, elderly woman in mourning black walked in. The courtroom gasped. Julian Blackwood's face went the color of curdled milk. "Objection!" Julian's lawyer shouted. "Who is this?" "This," Silas said, walking down the aisle, "is Julian Blackwood's aunt." Beatrice Sterling took the stand. She looked at her nephew with pure disdain. "Mrs. Sterling," Samuel asked, "do you recognize the jewelry in question?" "I do," she said, her voice crisp. "It belonged to my sister. Julian gave it to Elara's mother years ago as a bribe. He was trying to buy his way into their social circle. There were no conditions. It was a gift. And what of Mr. Blackwood's character?" "He is a monster," Beatrice said calmly. "He stalked this poor girl. He threatened to ruin her reputation if she didn't marry him. When she ran, he manufactured these charges to drag her back. He treats people like possessions." She pulled a packet of letters from her bag. "I found these in his desk. Letters detailing his plans to break Miss Vance once he retrieved her." The judge read the letters in silence. The courtroom held its breath. Julian tried to stand, but Silas stepped in his path, a wall of muscle and rage. "Case dismissed," the judge slammed his gavel. "Mr. Blackwood, you will leave my town immediately, or I will have you arrested for perjury and attempted kidnapping." Chaos erupted. Elara leaped from the dock, rushing into Silas's arms. He held her so tight she thought her ribs might crack. "You found her," she sobbed into his coat. "How did you find her?" "I remembered you mentioned a compassionate aunt once," Silas whispered. "I spent every dime I had on telegrams and a private detective. I wasn't going to lose you, Elara. Not to him, not to anyone." They rode back to Iron Creek under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The air smelled of thawing earth. Spring was coming. When they reached the ranch, the hands were waiting. They had strung lanterns between the house and the barn. A banner painted on a bedsheet read, "Welcome home." "We figured a celebration was in order," Red grunted, looking embarrassed. That evening, the ranch was alive. Neighbors who had once shunned the strange woman came with pies and fiddles, their opinions changed by the news of the trial and Silas's devotion. As the sun set, painting the mountains in gold, Silas pulled Elara onto the porch. "I have something for you," he said. He handed her a small velvet box. Inside was not a diamond, but a ring made of twisted copper and silver, crafted by the local blacksmith. "It ain't Philadelphia gold," Silas said, twisting his hat in his hands. "But it's real, like this place, like us." "Silas?" "I love you, Elara. I love your grit. I love your biscuits. I love that you sing to storms. Marry me. Let's make this place a home." "Yes," she said, slipping the ring onto her finger. "Yes, 1,000 times." The wedding was impromptu, held right there under the stars. Sheriff Miller officiated. The O'Malley brothers cried. As they danced to the fiddle music, a rider approached. It was the banker, Mr. Henderson. "Hate to interrupt," Henderson said, dismounting, "but I have a letter for Mrs. Thorne." Elara took the envelope. It was from Beatrice Sterling. "My dear Elara, by the time you read this, Julian will be facing his own legal troubles back east. I have ensured he cannot harm you again. Enclosed is a bank draft. Consider it a wedding gift and repayment for what my family put you through. Build something beautiful." Elara opened the draft. It was for $10,000, enough to pay off the ranch's debts, buy new stock, and fix every broken fence in the county. She showed it to Silas. He stared at it, stunned. "We're free," he whispered. "No," Elara corrected, turning him to face the mountains. "We're home." A year later, the Iron Creek Ranch was unrecognizable. The house was painted a cheerful yellow. The garden was bursting with vegetables. A new herd of Herefords grazed in the valley. Elara stood on the porch, rocking a cradle with her foot. Inside, a baby boy slept, clutching a tiny stuffed horse Red had carved. Silas rode in from the pasture, dusty and tired, but smiling. He dismounted and walked up the steps, kissing Elara on the forehead, then the baby. "He sleeping?" "Finally." "I heard Cyrus Vane is selling out," Silas said, sitting on the railing. "Moving to the city. Can't handle the competition." Elara smiled. "Good riddance." "I was thinking," Silas said softly. "Elara Vance is a name that ran away. Elara Blackwood was a name used to hurt you. And Elara Thorne? That's a good name. but I've been thinking of you as something else lately. Oh, Grace, he said, because that's what you brought here. Grace under fire, grace in the storm. She looked at the sunset, the same bruised purple as the day she arrived, but now it didn't look like a wound. It looked like a promise. Grace, she tested the word. I like it. Grace Thorne leaned her head on her husband's shoulder. The wind picked up, whistling through the eaves, but it was no longer a lonely sound. It was a harmony. Silas picked up his fiddle from the chair nearby. He began to play a waltz, slow and sweet. Grace began to hum, her voice drifting over the plains, a song of survival, of iron, and love, echoing against the eternal mountains of the West. Thank you for journeying back to the Wild West with us for this story of love and survival. If Silas and Grace's story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It helps us bring more stories like this to life. Question for the comments. Silas forgave the past and fought for his future. If you were in Elara's shoes, would you have risked the storm to save him? Let me know down below. Don't forget to subscribe to the Dust and Legends channel and ring the bell so you never miss a new adventure. We have a new romance coming next week that you won't want to miss. Until next time, keep your powder dry and your heart open.